In the Strait of Gibraltar, summer of 2024, a group of orcas did something no marine biologist can fully explain. They approached a British sailing yacht called the Bonamy William, traveling at 12 knots under full sail, and began to ram it. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, with the precision of coordinated hunters. They targeted the rudder. They bit through the steering mechanism. They bent the propeller shaft until the vessel could no longer hold its course. Within minutes, the Bonamy William was taking on water. The crew radioed for help. A rescue helicopter arrived. The yacht went down. The orcas swam away. 300 miles north, on September 13, 2025, it happened again. 2 vessels, same day, near Lisbon. A tourist yacht was struck so hard, its hull cracked below the waterline. All 5 aboard were rescued. A few miles away, a second boat was damaged. The pattern had now been documented more than 673 times across the waters of Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. And in every single incident, across every single attack, not one human being had been harmed. This is not the behavior of a predator. It is not an animal defending territory. It is something else entirely. And to understand it, you have to forget everything you thought you knew about the creature humans call the killer whale. The first lie is in the name itself. Orchinus orca is not a whale. It is the largest member of the dolphin family, a lineage that diverged from the toothed whales roughly 11 million years ago. The name killer whale is a translation error that has persisted for centuries. European fishermen, watching these creatures hunt in coordinated packs, called them whale killers, a reference to their prey, not their species. When the phrase crossed languages, the words were inverted. The whale killer became the killer whale, and the world never looked back. The orca is not a whale. It is not a killer in any meaningful sense. It is a dolphin that has evolved into something far stranger and more intelligent than our language has been able to describe. The problem that faced marine biologists for decades was one of classification, not in the Linnaean sense, but in the psychological sense. They were trying to understand a creature whose cognitive capabilities did not fit the existing framework. Whales were large, dolphins were smart. But here was an animal that combined the size of a whale with a brain 5 times larger than a human's. Adult male orcas reach 32 feet and weigh up to 22,000 pounds. Their dorsal fins stand 6 feet tall. Their teeth are 4 inches long. They consume 300 pounds of food every day. But size alone did not make the orca the ocean's apex predator. Intelligence did. An adult orca's brain weighs approximately 15 pounds, roughly 5 times a human brain. But raw size is not the measure that matters. What matters is structure. The orca brain is folded in the same complex pattern as the human brain, with a highly developed cerebral cortex responsible for higher-order thinking, problem-solving, and abstract reasoning. More significantly, it possesses a region called the paralimbic lobe, far more developed than the equivalent in humans, an area that integrates emotions with complex thought, connecting the instinctive responses of the limbic system to the analytical processing of the frontal cortex. Within this region, scientists have identified spindle neurons, von Economo neurons, which in humans and great apes are linked to empathy, intuition, self-awareness, and deep social bonding. Orcas have them in concentrations that may exceed any other non-human species. What this means is that orcas may experience emotions as deeply as humans do, possibly more deeply. They may feel loss, grief, attachment, and joy through a lens of subjective experience that is directly comparable to human consciousness. And this changes everything about how we interpret their behavior. Consider the hunting strategies. In the waters off Argentina, a pod has developed a technique called intentional stranding. They charge toward the beach at full speed, deliberately beaching themselves to snatch sea lion pups from the surf, then writhe back into the water. Mothers teach their calves this technique over years of practice. Not all pods have it. It is a local tradition, passed down through the same mechanisms that transmit human cultural knowledge. In the Antarctic, Orcas have developed a technique for hunting seals on ice floes. They swim in formation and generate a wave that washes the seal off the ice into the jaws of a waiting pod member. The wave must be calibrated precisely. Too weak and the seal stays. Too strong and it is swept past. The technique requires 4 or 5 individuals to coordinate within a fractional tolerance. These are not behaviors, they are skills, and skills require teaching, learning, and cultural transmission, capacities that until recently, science reserved exclusively for humans and a handful of great apes. The evidence extends into the domain of communication. Every orca pod has its own dialect, calls and vocal patterns learned socially, not inherited genetically. Calves learn their mother's dialect in their first year, the same way human infants learn language. Different pods that share geographic areas understand each other's dialects, but maintain their own distinct vocal identity. Individual orcas have their own signature whistles, unique sound patterns that function exactly like names. A mother teaches her calf its signature whistle shortly after birth, and the calf uses it for the rest of its life to identify itself to the pod. This is language in the truest sense. Not mere communication, but a system of symbols that conveys meaning, identifies individuals, maintains social bonds across decades. The pod remembers. Now consider this. For all of recorded history, across every ocean, in every encounter between wild orcas and human beings, there has never been a single documented case of an orca killing a human in the wild. Not one. A creature that can take down a blue whale, the largest animal that has ever existed, has never harmed a human swimmer, diver, or sailor in its natural habitat. Think about what this means. An animal with the physical capability to crush bones, the intelligence to coordinate complex attacks, and the hunting instinct to pursue prey across vast distances, has chosen never to harm us. Not because it cannot, not because we are difficult prey, because it decides not to. This is not the behavior of a mindless predator. It is the behavior of a being that makes choices, a being that distinguishes between prey and non-prey, between threat and non-threat, between action and restraint. A being that has, across thousands of generations, maintained a boundary that no individual has ever crossed. And that boundary is now being tested. The first recorded incident of a boat being attacked by orcas occurred in 2020 off the coast of Gibraltar. A small group approached a sailing vessel and began pushing against its hull. The crew, terrified and baffled, watched as the animals targeted the rudder, not the propeller, not the hull, but the steering mechanism specifically. The pod continued for several minutes, then departed. In the years that followed, the behavior spread. By 2024, the International Whaling Commission had documented more than 673 similar incidents. The attacks have been traced to approximately 15 individual orcas, a single family pod that has adopted the behavior and is teaching it to others. The pattern is consistent. The orcas approach from behind. They target the rudder. They bite and push until the steering mechanism fails. They do not attack the crew. They do not attempt to capsize the vessel. They disable it. Once the rudder is destroyed, they leave. The pattern is so consistent that sailors in the region have developed protocols. Stop the boat, drop the sails, let the rudder float freely. If the rudder does not resist, the orcas lose interest. The question that no one can answer is why. The leading hypothesis among marine biologists is that the behavior is play. Naomi Rose, a senior marine scientist, has stated it plainly. If the orcas wanted to sink the boats, they would. The fact that they are not killing anyone, that they target only the steering mechanism, suggests not aggression, but play, a game that young orcas have invented and spread among their social group. The 15 individuals responsible are predominantly juveniles, the age group most likely to engage in exploratory behaviors. New behaviors that originate with juveniles can spread through social transmission, becoming cultural phenomena within a single generation. But there is another possibility. Orcas are among the few non-human species that have experienced the trauma of captivity. The story of Tilikum, who killed 3 people during 34 years in captivity, is the most famous example. And now, for the first time in history, wild orcas are deliberately interfering with human vessels, not to hunt, not to defend, but to communicate something we cannot yet understand. Are they playing a game whose rules we have not learned, or are they trying to tell us something about a relationship that, from their perspective, has not been kind? To understand the boat attacks, you must first understand orca social structure. Orcas live in matrilineal pods, led by the oldest female. These pods range from 3 to 50 members, and the bonds between them persist for life. Young orcas do not leave their mothers when they reach maturity. They stay. Males remain with their mothers for their entire lives, 40, 50, 60 years. The pod is not a temporary association, it is a permanent family. Female orcas are one of only 5 species on Earth that undergo menopause, including humans, pilot whales, beluga whales, and orcas. This is not an accident. It is an evolutionary adaptation that serves a specific purpose. Around the age of 40, female orcas stop reproducing, but they continue living for another 40 to 50 years. During this post-reproductive phase, they become the memory of the pod. They remember where the salmon run during droughts. They know which bays to avoid during storms. They lead their families through periods of scarcity, using knowledge accumulated over half a century. Research has shown that pods with living grandmothers survive food shortages at significantly higher rates than pods without them. The grandmother is not a figurehead. She is the living archive of the pod's collective experience. When she dies, the knowledge she carries dies with her. The hunting grounds, the migration routes, the acoustic landmarks, the dialectal variations that distinguish one pod from another. This is what the boat attacks may be revealing. A culture that is older than human civilization, transmitting knowledge across generations, adapting to changing conditions, and now encountering something new, the human machine, the sailing vessel, the rudder, the metal hull that cuts through water like a foreign body. In 2018, a southern resident orca named Tahlequah, designated J35, gave birth to a calf that died shortly after. She carried the body on her rostrum for 17 days, swimming more than 1,000 miles through the waters of the Pacific Northwest, refusing to let go. Scientists called it her tour of grief. This was not instinct. Instinct does not persist for 17 days against all biological imperative. What J35 did cannot be explained by instinct. It can only be explained by emotion, by a depth of attachment that exceeds the simple bond between mother and offspring, by a capacity for grief that mirrors our own. The question that haunts marine biologists is not whether orcas have emotions. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is whether our emotional frameworks are adequate to understand them. The same cognitive capacities that enable orcas to grieve, to teach, to learn, and to communicate also enable them to innovate. And innovation is what we are witnessing in the Strait of Gibraltar. A group of young orcas discovered that boat rudders respond to pressure in interesting ways. When pushed, they spin. When bitten, they fail. The discovery is not an attack, it is an experiment. And like any experiment conducted by intelligent beings, it has spread. The behavior has now been observed in 3 distinct regions, off the Iberian coast, the Canary Islands, and the North Sea. In each region, the pattern is slightly different, suggesting local pods have adapted the technique to their own conditions. This is not mimicry, it is cultural transmission with variation, the same process that drives innovation in human societies. Marine biologists who have studied the footage estimate the orcas could sink every boat that enters their range if they chose to. They are strong enough, coordinated enough, intelligent enough to recognize that humans are vulnerable when their vessel is disabled, and yet they do not escalate. The boundary holds. Now consider the other side of the story. In the waters off the Pacific Northwest, the southern resident orca population is classified as endangered. Their primary food source, Chinook salmon, has collapsed. Noise pollution from shipping has degraded their acoustic environment. Chemical pollutants have accumulated in their blubber. There are now fewer than 75 southern resident orcas remaining. Each year, another grandmother dies, taking generations of knowledge with her. The species that has ruled the ocean for 90 million years, that has never harmed a human in the wild, that communicates in languages we cannot translate, that mourns its dead. This species is dying. The boat attacks must be understood in this context. They are not an act of war. They are an act of engagement, a species encountering an object in its environment and attempting to understand it. The orcas of Gibraltar are not attacking us. They are reaching toward us with curiosity, the same curiosity that drove a mother to carry her dead calf for 17 days. The answer, when it comes, may be simple. The orcas are not trying to sink the boats. They are trying to disable the objects that have filled their ocean with noise, that have disrupted their acoustic environment, that have made it harder for them to hear their own calls across distances their ancestors navigated for millions of years. The rudder is not a target. It is the control surface of a sound source driving them away from their own communication. And they have learned that disabling it makes the noise stop. This is not revenge. It is the application of intelligence to an environmental challenge, the same application orcas have been making for 90 million years. They did not evolve to understand our machines. They evolved to understand each other. And the tragedy is that we have placed machines between them, engines, hulls, rudders, that they must now contend with, without precedent, without any guide except the intelligence evolution has given them. The orca has been solving problems since before humans existed. It has watched continents drift, ice ages advance and retreat. It has developed a brain that can process emotions as deeply as our own, a culture that transmits knowledge across generations. It has crossed paths with our species countless times across that history, and it has never harmed us. What the orcas are doing is the continuation of a relationship that has existed since the first humans paddled across the ocean in hollowed logs, watched by the black dorsal fins that sliced through the surface beside them. They are playing with us. They are testing us. They are communicating with us in the only way they can, through behavior, through the manipulation of objects, through the only form of dialogue that exists between species that do not share a language. The message may be this: we are watching you. We could stop you, could sink every vessel that crosses our path, but we choose not to. Not because we cannot, because across 90 million years of collective experience, we have decided that the relationship between our two families is worth preserving. The question is whether we will make the same choice.